Hey, g'day, it's Presso. Thanks for stopping by. Now, I wanted to do a review of TouchDRO. TouchDRO is a platform that allows you to use an ordinary Samsung Galaxy or Android tablet as a display device, and the TouchDRO Bluetooth module takes the signals from the glass scales or magnetic scales or whatever you're using on your machine, and it transmits that to the tablet, and you've got a full DRO display on your tablet. Now, I've been using it for about 3 years, and I thought it was about time I had a look at it as a long-term prospect, because some people have asked if I'm happy with it or not, or what I would do differently if I was setting it up again. So I figured it's about time I address that. Now, if you came here today looking for a machining video, I'm sorry, it's going to be a lot of talk, but I want to show you a few other projects that I'm working on. So it's sort of a general update on what's happening on the channel as well. So let's have a look at the first little projects, and then we'll go into the TouchDRO. Now, I'm not sure if you're a fan of Stefan Gotchwinter. I certainly am, and a while ago he posted 2 videos on the design and manufacture of this little compact DTI holder. And in this style of DTI holder here, you clamp this spindle in a collet. You take the spindle out of gear. This is on a Bridgeport or a Bridgeport clone, but you can also do it on a CNC router. And then you swivel the whole DTI assembly, and it's got a fairly decent range of movement. You can undo this little clamp screw here, move the indicator backwards and forwards over a decent sort of range, and you can indicate in very, very small diameter bores or pins quite easily. Now, I've got one of these Intercold style holders here, and these work well. These have the advantage that you can clamp them to the spindle nose with the tool in the collet. Put your indicator in the clamp here and then spin the whole unit round and indicate in the work. Now, the only thing with these, I find anyway, is that you've only got to sneeze and they change position. So this arm here is not particularly rigid. There's a lot of adjustments, a lot of clamp screws and so on. Now, with this one here though, once it's locked in place, it's almost impossible to move it accidentally. And this little handle here allows you to spin the thing around very easily. Now, the face of the dial is always facing upwards, so you can see it quite clearly, and you can adjust it down so it can indicate in very, very small diameters. Now, when I was making this one, I made it out of aluminium. The one that Stefan did, he used a high quality hardenable steel, and then he sent it out for plasma nitriding. Now, I don't have any of those fancy steels, and I certainly don't know any companies that would do plasma nitriding for me. So I've made mine from aluminium. Now, I will bead blast this and anodize it, and those 2 processes help to toughen up the surface of aluminium so it will resist scratching and denting and so on. So the only thing is, with the one that Stefan made, the dovetail that you clamp onto was on an angle. Now, this indicator here, the dovetail is actually parallel to the center line of the DTI body. So I have to change the design of this clamp here, and also the diameter of the dial is different to the one that Stefan specified in his drawings. And by the way, you can get these for free from Stefan's website. So I did have to change the radius of that cutout there, and I just did that in the milling machine with a boring head. I set the boring head to a very precise diameter and just plunged the boring bar down to do the last operation on that. But I'm quite happy with it. The other thing is that Stefan made a single flute cutter for doing the dovetail. Now, I chickened out and I bought myself one of these little 6mm 60-degree dovetail cutters. This was quite cheap, turned up very quickly, did a perfect job, and saved me a lot of angst and heartache trying to make a like a custom cutter on a D-bit grinder. I have got a D-bit grinder and I could have done it, but I just got lazy. So there you go, that's Stefan's little compact DTI holder. I tried it out, works perfectly. Well, this is the next side project, and again there won't be a build video on this, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But this is the quill drive and the quill handle from my Bridgeport milling machine. And I sort of hate it. The way it works is that there's a couple of grooves in this projection here, and there's a spring-loaded ball bearing inside the quill handle, and there's a pin here which drops into one of those holes in that radial pattern around the outside of the flange there. And the idea is that you can press it on and that. Now, there we go. And then the pin will drop into one of those holes. And when you want to reposition the handle, because 90% of the time it's in the wrong place, you've got to sort of push that out, rotate the handle, find a new hole for it to drop into, and then you can have the handle in a convenient place at the front of the machine. Now, just the process of doing that is a bit painful. Now, I know you can get like a steering wheel arrangement, and they look cool, but I think there's a better way of doing it. And I've got some drawings here for what is like a quick set quill handle for a Bridgeport milling machine or any other style of turret milling machine. Now, the reason I'm not doing a build video on this is because somebody else has already done it and they did a really good job. Now, there is a YouTube channel called Projects Down Under. He's a fellow Aussie, and he did a build video on this exact same tool. So I'll put a link in the description below if you want to go and look at the way he made his, and I'm basically doing the same thing. So this is the main body of the quick set quill handle. This will have a deep slot machine across the top here. Basically there's just a lever operated pin which allows the pin to drop into, again, those same holes there, and you can just pull the handle in and then rotate the whole of this assembly here. When you release the handle, it drops the pin into one of those holes. So again, I'll show this when it's done, and I'll do all of the finishing processes on the whole thing, so I'll parkerize all of these parts. But yeah, again, it's just one of those little functional things that makes using the milling machine a lot more enjoyable. Okay, this is another project that I worked on for the milling machine. I made this about 18 months ago, and it's a ring light that fits on the quill of the Bridgeport milling machine. And it works okay. I sort of, thought that there was a few disadvantages with it. The main one being that the amount of light that this LED ring light produces. Now, this is called an SMD style of ring light, and it's a cool white color, and at its maximum brightness it was barely adequate. And this 3D printed housing here was a bit of a nuisance. It was in the way and it was subject to damage, so if you hit it with a hammer or a mallet or something, you could crack it and break it. But the good thing was that it was all self-contained. There was an on-off switch on the side here, there was a port here which I've removed to take the 12 volt power supply, and this was the backing ring that went behind that 3D printed part, and it just simply attached up through an existing fitting that was on the milling machine head. So it was okay, but I thought I could do better. So what I did was I purchased one of these ring lights here. Now this one here is a COB style, that means chip on board, and these are about 3 times brighter than the SMD type that I had. And I also want to be able to turn this on and off and also vary the amount of light. Now I bought a little controller, this style here, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. So this took 12 volt power, and there's an integrated on-off switch in there as well, and you could vary the brightness. The only trouble was these just kept failing one after the other. I think they just couldn't handle the current that this ring light was using, and after about like half an hour of use they would just simply get really hot and die. So I ended up buying this style here. Now this one here I've had on the milling machine now for about 3 or 4 months, and I've used it all day. Just simply had it running all day. I forget to turn it off, and I've had absolutely no issues with it. So this has variable brightness, and it's got connections here for 12 to 24 volts in and out. But what I did with the one on the milling machine at the moment is I fitted a port in the back here, a 12 volt port, and I can plug in the power supply. The only problem with this one is that you physically can't turn it off. You can turn it down to 0, but I'm assuming it's still consuming some power when that's happening. But I'll show you on the milling machine now what it looks like and how I've got it fitted. So this is the dimmer here, and what I've done here is I've got a 3D printed clamp which attaches to this piece of 25mm ERW tubing, and this is the new mounting system that I use for the tablet on TouchDRO. Now at the top here is a 12 volt power supply inlet with a plug. I retrofitted that socket into the housing from the dimmer when I purchased it, and at the bottom here there's a pair of wires coming out and they supply the power to the ring light. So there's no on-off switch. You could fit one, I didn't, but you could, I suppose, fit a toggle switch or a slide switch somewhere so you could physically turn it off. But when this rotary knob here is in the off position, there's no light, but like I said, it's probably still consuming power. But you can vary the brightness right up to maximum, which is very bright. I usually run it about halfway, and that's fine. So there's the dimmer there. Now it's sort of up on top of the RAM of the milling machine and back away from the machining area. So I didn't want any problem with chips getting in it, and so far it's been fine. Now I waited to do this video because I wanted to be sure that this device here was reliable. Now sometimes you do these videos and you show a product and you use it for about like a day or 2 days, and then you find that it fails. But this one now, I've run that all day and there's no issue at all. It doesn't get hot, there's no problem. Well, this is the ring light up here and it's sitting on the bottom of the quill housing, and if you're looking at the amount of light landing on the work in the vise there, you're probably saying, well, that's adequate, that's great. And that's only about half the brightness. So I can turn it right up and you can see you get very good strong illumination on that part. However, if you lower the quill or if you have a bulky tool in the spindle, you're going to get a shadow. So here it is here. I'll lower the quill down to about where it would be if you're working, and now you can see there's a substantial shadow falling on that part there. Now I do have another work light and I'll turn that on. Now that auxiliary work light is sitting off to the side there, and that helps to fill in some of the shadows. But it's sort of unavoidable with the ring light. You're always going to get a shadow in the center there. So with the ring light and the auxiliary work light, you do get good general illumination on the work, but it's never going to be like a flat illumination across the whole surface. So I'm going to take off the ring light and we'll have a closer look at the component parts. Well, this is how I've mounted mine on the Bridgeport, and this cast boss here was originally designed for holding indicators. So what I've done is I've just made a stainless steel pin, and that clamps in place in that boss there. So there's the whole thing there. Now this diffuser here is 3D printed from clear PETG filament, and that helps to protect the COB ring light and also diffuses the light. All the mounting hardware is 2.5mm socket head cap screws, and this thick piece of aluminium here is designed as a heatsink, so it provides support for the COB ring light, but these things get really hot. If you're running them at full brightness and you just had the bare ring light sitting on your hand, you'd burn your hand very quickly. Now this at the moment is warm, but not so hot that you can't touch it. So far it's proved to be adequate. I haven't had any ring light failure. I haven't had a failure with the control or the dimmer. So that's why I wanted to wait a bit before I started talking about it on camera. Because I've done that before. I've sort of come up with an idea and I tell everybody about it, and then you realise there's inherent problems and you've got to backpedal a bit. This is a little 3D printed strain relief that's attached to that piece of aluminium there. And I know that looks like checker plate or sort of tread plate, but that's all I had in that thickness of aluminium. So it's all been powder coated in black, once again to help with the heatsink effect, and it just clamps back up like that. So if you're thinking about doing one, that's just the basics of how I did it. I will put a link in the description to the eBay site where I bought the dimmer and the COB ring light itself. So what follows is sort of a long-term review of TouchDRO. Now if you're not familiar with it, this device here is a Bluetooth adapter. Now it takes the digital signals from your scales, no matter what sort of scales you're using, and it transmits that via Bluetooth to an Android device. Now in my case I'm using a Samsung Galaxy Tab, a 10-inch tablet. Now it doesn't have to be that, it can be a phone or any sort of device, it doesn't have to be Samsung. As long as it's using Android 5 or better, it will work. So I've actually had this tablet here and another one that I purchased initially, but I've also run it from a phone, and all of those things work fine. So I have actually replaced this Bluetooth adapter though. Now when I first did a video on this some time ago, I was using capacitive scales on this machine, and they worked, but they weren't 100% reliable. and I've since replaced those capacitive scales with 5 micron Sino glass scales. Now Sino is just a brand. I use them on my lathe. They've been rock solid, never had a problem with them. Made in China of course, but they seem to be quite good. I bought 4 new glass scales, fitted them to the machine, and since then it's been 100% reliable. So this is one of the scales that I purchased initially for this machine. Now this is an eye gauging capacitive scale. Now you can buy cheaper generic versions of these capacitive scales, but I bought the eye gauging ones because they're a recognized brand, relatively well known, and the reviews on these were good. And you might say, well, you idiot, why did you buy those? Well, initially my reasoning was that they were a bit cheaper than glass scales, not significantly cheaper, but certainly cheaper, and they were easy to fit and easy to cut to length. So with the capacitive scale, you can take the end off the scale and you just get a hacksaw and you can cut it off at whatever point you want. The only part of this scale that actually does the work is this sort of black tape here. And if you look at it in the correct light, you can see what looks like a set of piano keys on it. And those discrete units turn the movement of the read head into digital signals that go to the Bluetooth adapter. So in my case, I just thought, well, you know, glass scales are a bit of a nuisance to set up. They're a little bit harder, a little bit more expensive. They are inherently more fragile because they're made of glass. These can be bent and they will still work. You know, you can put a mild flex in that, it will still work. They are fairly immune to chips and coolant, better than glass scales, but you know, once again, you can ruin them if you're not careful with them. So, you know, it seemed to tick a lot of boxes, and I fitted them up to the machine in like a day, and initially it worked. I didn't have a problem with it. But what I noticed was that it started to have issues when I turned the machine, the actual milling head, on or off. And I wrote to Yuri. Now, Yuri is the guy behind TouchDRO. He lives in the USA, and we had a conversation about the issues that I was having. He sent me a whole bunch of things to try, and I tried all of those. I thought I had fixed the problem when I found a loose connection in the electrical side of my milling machine motor, but I fixed that and the problem was still there. And what used to happen was you'd set, you know, your DRO, you'd be machining a part, and you'd turn the machine off, you'd turn the milling head off, and you'd notice that one of the digits on the display had changed. And not by a small amount, it was a fairly significant amount, could be up to, you know, whole millimeters. And if you didn't notice it happening, it meant that you would be machining the part with incorrect information on the DRO, and that eventually led to scrap parts. And it became a nuisance. I used to have to sort of look up the display when I turned the milling head on or off, and if I noticed that it had moved, I had to go back and reset everything, and it just meant that I couldn't trust the DRO. Now, if you can't trust it, there's no point in having it. So eventually I bit the bullet, took all of these off and bought the glass scales. Now, the thing is that the adapter that I was using is this one here, and it uses USB style connections for the scales. And the scales themselves have the same connection underneath, if I can find it. So there it is there. That was the original Z scale for the quill, and they just plug in there. Now, when you buy glass scales, they have different connections. So they've got a 9-pin connector, and I believe that you can retrofit the 9-pin connectors to these adapters here, but you need to update the firmware. So rather than do that, I just went and bought a whole new adapter and fitted up the glass scales, and everything was rosy again. It's been 100% rock solid. I did have an issue with it, but it wasn't related to the scales or the adapter. Let's have a look at the original tablet that I bought and what I've got now. So this is the original tablet that I bought to go with TouchDRO. Now this is a brand called Laser. It's a 10-inch Android tablet, and it was the cheapest one I could buy. And you'd think I'd learn a lesson here, but anyway, I didn't. So I used this for a while, it was okay. The problem was that the power switch was really, really difficult to switch on, and you had to sort of really push on it and wiggle your finger around. I'd say it was faulty right from the get-go, but I just charged this up and it was working. I hadn't used it for about probably a year. Took it out and switched it on. It started, then I charged it, and now it's showing a dead battery. So I'm just sort of pushing that power switch now, and again sort of nothing happens. Come on, there it is. So it's just showing a dead battery. So I guess that's rubbish, it's scrap. Yeah, disappointing. But anyway, let me show you the next one that I tried. Now this is the device that I'm using on the milling machine at the moment. Now this is about an 8-year-old Samsung Galaxy Tab 4. Now this belonged to my wife. She used it for about 3 years from new, and then the battery started to fail, and we just put it aside. But I dug it out after this, I swapped out this laser tablet, and I bought a non-genuine battery from eBay and fitted it, and then it started to work properly. So I've been using it for about the last 2 years on the milling machine, and one thing that I've found out is that you should not leave the charging cable connected permanently. Now I didn't know that, but apparently if you leave it charging 24 hours a day, especially with a non-genuine battery, it will cause the battery to swell, and then eventually the battery will fail. Now I don't know if you can see it, but there's about a 2mm bulge in the screen on this particular tablet, and if you stand off to the side you can see the curvature in that screen. Now that's the battery swelling, and eventually that battery will burst, and I'm a bit worried that you hear stories about lithium batteries exploding and burning, so I don't really want that in my workshop. So I'm going to replace the tablet that I use upstairs. My wife and I both have a tablet each, and the one that I have now is about 3 years old, so I'm going to swap it out for this one. I'll buy myself a new tablet to use upstairs. Now remember, when you're setting up TouchDRO, you can use any old Android device. So if you've got one lying around, you can use it. It's not like you have to go out and buy one brand new. Now there's another thing I want to show you, which I only just found out about 6 months ago. So I'm going to start this up, and this one starts a lot more readily than that rubbish laser one that I've got. And I want you to watch what happens when we get the home screen, and you'll see up in the top right hand corner here, you'll see a status for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Now as it turns out on this particular tablet, and I don't know if this is true for all Samsungs, but it can take up to a minute for the Bluetooth to start. So we'll wait till we get the home screen here. Come on. Okay. So look up here and you see the Wi-Fi, but there's still no Bluetooth. So let's wait and wait and wait. And what I found out is if you start TouchDRO now, before the Bluetooth is established, then TouchDRO will fail. And it does that by giving you this message. So it says it was able to establish a connection to the scale adapter, but did not receive any position data. All right, so let's wait again. Wi-Fi is working. Right, now the Bluetooth has appeared just up here, and now you can start TouchDRO. And if everything's worked correctly, you should see the digits are dimmed out, and then they'll go green when it's established connection. Did that work or not? There we go. Okay, so there it is there. It's connected, everything's working fine. But I didn't realize that I was doing it all wrong, and about half the time I would start up TouchDRO, I would get that failure message, and the way to fix it is you simply cycle the power on the Bluetooth adapter, and then it goes back to normal. But if you're having problems, if you're having issues when you're starting it, just wait until you see the Bluetooth is ready, and then it should be fine. Now, there's something else I want to show you here. Now, the thing about TouchDRO is that it gets updated regularly. So if you bought one of those sort of standalone DRO type displays, and I've got one on my lathe and I've used that for quite a long time, and it's absolutely fine on my lathe. But what happens is you buy it and you're stuck with whatever displays and whatever operating system work within that. But with this, it gets updated regularly. Now, as an example of that, when you go to reset one of the axes in TouchDRO, you can do that by adding a long press. So on Y, I'll just press that, and then you'll get the opportunity to reset that particular axis. Now, this is new. And what you can do now is you can use mathematical functions. So if I want to sort of do some sort of calculation with this, I can sort of divide that by 2 and then add 3, for example. So the way you would do that is you just simply put a cursor after the digits that are on the screen now, and then I can go plus, I don't know, plus 4 and set dimension. And now you can see the updated dimension here. So like I say, that's new, and I believe this version of TouchDRO got updated. And that new version is version 3.23.09, and it was updated on the 26th of November. And it's a 24 megabyte download from Google Play Store. So if you've got TouchDRO and you haven't updated it, check what version you're using, and you can get a lot of these tools and all of the updates with that new version. So for example, TouchDRO now has a touch probe function, and it's got some really cool features in it. One of the things you can do is touch off on a face or inside of a bore or whatever, and it will average out 3 different touches to sort of help to cut down any error in that process. So once again, there's some of the new features, and there are lots more. I haven't got time to go into them all in this video. But that's what I like about it. You buy it and then you get updates. Another upgrade I did with TouchDRO recently was I changed the way I'd mounted the Bluetooth adapter and the screen to the actual milling machine. So what I've got now is a steel tubing arm which has been bent, and I've mounted the Bluetooth adapter using a 3D printed clamp, and I've got the screen so I can swivel it. And I can also move the arm in or out to a comfortable position, so it's easy to view what's going on. Now, the way I had it before, I had an arm connected to these 2 points here, and that meant that if I was to swivel the RAM around 180 degrees, and I'm doing that now because I've got a slotting attachment, if I had turned the RAM around 180 degrees, that meant that the TouchDRO arm, which was attached down here, would now be on the other side, and the whole thing would be pointing in the opposite direction. But with this, I can now swivel the RAM, I can undo the clamp at the top there if I need to, and reposition it so I can still use the DRO. Now, I haven't had to do that yet. I haven't actually used that slotting head. It's working and it's all running and everything, but I haven't actually used it. But this is just a little bit more versatile. So I think you see how that works there. I've got this piece of ERW tubing bent, and I just sort of mock that up and then bend it to suit. That puts the tablet in a convenient position here, and I can swivel the mounting of the tablet. This just fits down through an aluminium plug on the end of the tubing. And at the other end of the tube, I've got a similar aluminium piece pushed into the pipe, and like a kip clamp or a kip handle, so I can lock all that down. When that's locked, it's quite rigid. Now I've got the Bluetooth adapter clamped onto the arm here with some 3D printed parts. Same up here for the dimmer, for the ring light. And it's pleasant to use, and it looks nice. Looks more, looks more professional, I guess. It was pretty cobbled together before that. But the one thing I've got to do is get rid of this tablet before it explodes and ruins my day. So just to summarise, what would I do differently if I was choosing a DRO for my mill or my lathe? Well, I'd still use TouchDRO. I find it works best for me because of the graphical nature of the display. So I'm a graphical learner. I prefer to work with pictures instead of numbers and arbitrary symbols. I'd also avoid buying a cheap Android device right from the get-go, although if you're on a budget, I'd suggest trying the system out on an Android phone or a borrowed tablet. Now, if you don't like TouchDRO, you've only wasted the cost of the Bluetooth adapter. And you still have the scales fitted to your machine, and you can use those with an old school 7-segment display DRO. Now, if you do like TouchDRO, I would argue that buying a more upmarket tablet would be a good long-term solution. Next, I would have fitted glass scales right from the outset. Now, magnetic and capacitive scales could be considered as sort of an entry-level solution. However, they have their own issues, and in my situation, they just weren't reliable. Now, having said that, I know of some operators who use capacitive scales with TouchDRO, and they prove to be accurate and bulletproof. So, I don't know, maybe I've got some weird electrical environment in my workshop. Finally, get into the habit of plugging in the power to your tablet and starting it as soon as you get into the workshop in the morning or when you're about to start a session. At the end of the session, unplug the power and close TouchDRO. Actually close the app before you shut down the tablet. This will ensure that the connection to the Bluetooth adapter is not compromised. Now, TouchDRO will remember the absolute coordinates and the incremental position of the scales even when the tablet is powered down. So as long as you don't move the scales while the tablet's off, next time you restart TouchDRO, everything will be back where you left it the day before. Now, I put a link to the TouchDRO website in the description of this video if you're interested. Well, that's it for today's video, and I'm sorry about all the talking. This is not what I would normally do on this channel, but there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about, and I figured it was best to do it all in one video. Now, another thing I want to tell you was that about 5 months ago I monetized this channel. It was something I resisted doing for a long time because I didn't like the idea of ads going in my videos, but it turned out that was going to happen anyway by Google changing their policy about advertising. So I decided though that I would donate the revenue from the channel to a local charity. The charity I chose is called Wilvos. Now, they're a wildlife volunteer organisation. They help to rehabilitate animals from car accidents and car strikes. They help with orphan animals, and they do fantastic work in the community. So just by watching today's video, you're helping with that. And there was over $1,400 of revenue that was donated to Wilvos in the last 5 months. So I'm sure they appreciate the support that you're providing, and it's a great organisation to support. Now, don't forget, I've got links to these items in the description below if you're thinking that you might want to make one of these for your workshop. And I want to finish up with some wildlife clips. Now, these were some animals and birds we saw out of our kitchen window in the last week. And we get to see them just about every day, and you get to see them about once a fortnight. So I hope you enjoy, and thanks for watching today. It's Prezzo. Cheers. This female has had a young joey in the pouch, and this is the first time I've seen it. This is the same one that's been hanging around for the last 18 months or so. She had a joey last year. Joey's independent now, but this little young one in the pouch has grown over the last couple of months, but we haven't actually seen it. The funny thing about these eastern grey kangaroos, they can actually have a fetus in the womb. They can have a joey in the pouch, and they can have an independent joey that's now living outside the pouch, and she can produce 2 different kinds of milk for the independent joey and the other one for the one that's in the pouch. So yeah, pretty amazing creatures. So this is the juvenile. It's probably about 12 months old, 14 months old. It's not quite as big as its mother now. They've been really close to the house. I'm actually up in the kitchen at the moment because it's been so dry, and the grass around the back of the house here is nice and green and fresh. They've been hanging very close to the house.